What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and the more I think about it, the more the early rounds of your fantasy football drafts are like a game of Battleship. Of course, you're trying to draft next year's CeeDee Lamb, Christian McCaffrey, and get the studs up top, but you're also trying to avoid those landmines and huge busts that can just completely derail your fantasy football team. So today, we're going to try our best to look into a crystal ball and identify the 7 players you'll regret drafting inside of the top 6 rounds of your fantasy draft. These are guys that I think have huge bust potential, are overpriced, and I have not drafted them so far through the 10 or so high stakes teams that we've drafted on stream. As always, if you enjoyed this video, we're almost at 50,000 subscribers, which feels crazy to say. So make sure you subscribe, leave a like if you enjoy. Let's go.
Yes, stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. She gon' let me.
Now, first up, we have Saquon Barkley. Now, honestly, because we have like a week left of draft prep, everybody has their home leagues either today, tomorrow, this week, next weekend, whatever. We're going to start using this for the players. I am working behind the scenes with a guy who knows how to do API, and we'll eventually maybe have like a small web page that you guys can use to kind of see the consensus rankings, but this is just ESPN default rankings, Sleeper default rankings, Yahoo default rankings, which is their X rank, all put together for consensus into a consensus pick. So our first player here is Saquon Barkley. He is the consensus 112. He's going as the RB5 by consensus. And then you can see individually, ESPN, he's going 11th, Sleeper 11th, Yahoo 14th. So the deal with Saquon, I can't justify taking him anywhere in the first round. Even the early second feels rich. I'm taking A.J. Brown over him. I'm taking Garrett Wilson. I'm taking Puka Nacua. And on the running back side of things as well, I'm taking Jonathan Taylor. I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyron Williams, and Devon Achane all over Saquon Barkley. When we take these running backs early, we talk about it all the time with the legendary running back upside theory as laid out by Pat Kerrane a few years ago. If we're taking a running back early, they are very fragile. They bust at a high rate. Last year, we had McCaffrey up top, but then you also add Austin Eckler, Bijan Robinson, Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb. A lot of guys drafted highly didn't pan out. So if I take one of these guys early and we know how fragile they are and how much these running backs bust, I need the upside case scenario of hitting like 20 plus points per game or being the RB1 overall. And I just don't see how Saquon gets there. He hasn't hit 20 plus points per game since he was a rookie. And this isn't the same Saquon that was the prince who was promised, best running back prospect I've ever seen. I sometimes even go back and watch Penn State Saquon Barkley highlights. He was a monster. Then rookie year was a monster. Ever since he tore his ACL, he's getting older as a running back as well. We just don't see very long careers at the running back position, right? You can think back to Todd Gurley and Le'Veon Bell and all the running backs from my childhood outside of like the true Hall of Fame blue chip, Adrian Peterson types and I guess sort of LaDainian Tomlinson. These guys fall off a cliff. And for Saquon, I'm not saying that he's fallen off a cliff just yet, but he's not that same guy. Like, I know he holds a lot of name value as Saquon, but this is a good string of tweets here from Jacob Gibbs. We use his stuff all the time. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at JAGibbs_23. And here from 2021 to 2023, the last 3 years of data, Saquon is 6th worst in his tackle avoidance percentage. And it's a bad list to be a part of, man. We're talking Zeke Elliott, Fournette, Latavius Murray, Joe Mixon, Jamal Williams, Rashad White, A.J. Dillon, Antonio Gibson, some of the least efficient runners in the NFL. Now, everybody was in his comments saying what you guys are about to say as well. Well, the offensive line sucks. He was probably getting hit before or at the line of scrimmage. He then dispelled that myth where initial contact met at or behind the line of scrimmage on average was 20%, and then average avoided tackle rate beyond the line of scrimmage, 17.5%. So you actually, by having a bad offensive line, the running back, of course, has to now evade that tackler more often, which actually leads to higher avoided tackle rates. Saquon's bad offensive line should have helped him. It did not. His avoided tackle rate has actually still been super, super low. And then if we look at as well, maybe he was going up against heavy boxes on a bad Giants team. We look here, he dispelled this myth as well. When you look at runs against light boxes over the last 3 years, I believe, he's 39th in avoided tackle rate, 41st in rushing EPA per snap, 45th in rushing success rate among 46 qualifiers. So all I'm saying is that I don't think that he's the talent that he once was, and taking him in the first round at the 112 or 111 like he is on ESPN is a really thin bet. And then you add on top of that, I know that it's seen as a positive that he's not on the Giants anymore, but Dwayne McFarland laid it out here. You look at the year-over-year correlation of running backs changing teams. we usually want them to stay on the same team. Their PPR points, their rush attempts, routes, targets are all much less sticky when they move to a new situation. And we also have a scenario here on the Eagles where, yes, the offense will be better. It'll be the best offensive line he's had. It'll be the best scoring environment he's had in his career. But this is also a team that doesn't really feature a running back. Jalen Hurts has never had a running back finish inside of the top 15 in points per game. Now, of course, we're talking Miles Sanders, we're talking DeAndre Swift, but I just showed you Saquon, the name value is there. I 100% get it, but he is not, by and large, a massive upgrade over those players. And we're going to have Jalen Hurts squeezing 4 receptions. He's not going to check it down as often as a guy like Eli Manning when Saquon was a rookie and had that massive year. And then the goal line rushes are going to be split. So he's definitely going to have more touchdown upside than he had in New York, but it's still going to be capped at a ceiling. Now, I get all the time, wasn't Jonathan Taylor dealing with the same stuff with Richardson? Yes, but I would rather bet on the talent of Jonathan Taylor, who's 25 years old, no torn ACL history, is still on the same team, has juice. It's just not the same bet to me because he's not on the back 9 of his career yet. JT is still firmly in his prime, where that's not really the case with Saquon. So again, I would prefer a bunch of other running backs in the early second. I prefer a bunch of receivers at that 1-2 turn. And I think Saquon is going to be a pick that people end up regretting, especially, in these home leagues where he's going 111, 110. I've seen him go as high as 109 in some places, and I just can't get there. Now, I do get a lot of comments on these do not draft videos of, it's a lot of running backs. You guys know I do enjoy my wide receivers. I take wide receivers early and often, but I wanted to shine some light on some receivers here because honestly, the way that I started this outline for this video was not even early round busts, but really more so players I haven't drafted yet in my high stakes drafts that we actually stream all the time. I think we've streamed like 4 of the last 4 nights, high stakes drafts. We stream every night until kickoff. Make sure you check those out. But I was looking through it, like guys I haven't drafted yet, and then I also don't think I'll probably end up with any of them, and Mike Evans fits that build. Now, Mike Evans isn't necessarily like an awful pick, but I think that he is a pretty brutal pick, especially at that Yahoo rank of pick 20, and he's also in your home league. He's just a big name player, so he's going to go inherently earlier, and I think at the back half of the second round, like 212, 211, 210, and even in the early third, when in these consensus rankings, you have to take him over Cooper Kupp, over Malik Neighbors, over Jalen Waddle. I just can't do it. Even guys like DJ Moore and DK Metcalf, I would take over Mike Evans. And here's why. When we look at Mike Evans, he's on, I'm hesitant to call it a bad offense, but it's a bottom 10 or so offense in terms of Vegas projections, as highlighted by Connor Allen here. He looked through all the Vegas lines before the season and found which teams are projected to score the most points. Tampa Bay is 22nd. On top of that, you have Dave Canales leaving. With this tweet from Ryan Heath, every single spot that Canales has come to, the quarterback play has improved. If Baker Mayfield goes back in terms of adjusted net yards per attempt, which is just passing efficiency, if he goes back to that 4.83 2022 number, this whole offense is going to really struggle, and Mike Evans isn't going to be as good as he was last year, where he was a wide receiver 10 finisher in terms of points per game, and you drafted him in the 6th round, which was massive, right? That was a huge win, and somebody we were drafting as well on this channel, but now we're drafting that in the late 2nd. And last year was actually kind of an outlier for Mike Evans over his last 5 seasons. He had a really, really strong year, but I would bet against him repeating it. We can see over the last 5 years, 13 touchdowns was up to par with 2021 and 2020. What happens if that goes back down to 6 to 8 touchdowns? His targets per out run, 23.5% was a 5-year high. What if that comes down now with the addition of Jalen McMillan, a new offense coordinator, Chris Godwin now going back full-time into the slot? Yards per out run, 2.32. Again, a 5-year high coming off of a Baker Mayfield career year. If Baker Mayfield's efficiency dips, so does Mike Evans. And then PFF grade, 83.2, his highest since 2019. When we're talking about a 31-year-old wide receiver, you can kind of expect a lot of these to regress back to the mean. And if we're talking like under 2 yards per out run, under 20% targets per out run, and like 6 to 8 touchdowns, he can still get, I'm not saying that he's not going to get his 1,000-yard season. He will. I mean, that's just what Mike Evans does, and I'm not going to bet against that. But he can hit 1,000 receiving yards and be like a back-end wide receiver 2 instead of that wide receiver 10 in points per game he was last year and what you're drafting him at the late 2nd. So I would just rather pass. You can take other good receivers later. You're going to get Malik Neighbors in the 4th. You're going to get Stephon Diggs in the 4th in these home leagues. You're going to get Waddle, Kupp in the 3rd. You're going to get even in the 5th, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice. So I would just rather shy away from Mike Evans. If there's a guy like Devon Achane on the board or Nico Collins, that's the direction I'm going. And just to put a cherry on top, again, I'm not calling for the fall off here. But he can absolutely get, like, if he ends up with like 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, that's a loss in the second round or at the 2-3 turn. This is where he's at in terms of Ryan Heath's wide receiver performance by career year. Year 11 at this point. This is when we start to see a little bit more of a dip. Again, I think that he can be okay, but wide receiver 13, I think he's more likely to end up as like wide receiver 23 than he is wide receiver 13. Now, moving on from that, we're putting our neck on the line here, right? These are early picks for a reason, but we're going to, again, try and look into a crystal ball and talk through the players that might bust or underperform in their ADP. And Sam Laporta is one of them. Now, I have no issue with Sam Laporta, the player. I think that he's a good player. It's really, for me, more that you can get Trey McBride in the 5th round and you can get Dalton Kincaid in the 5th round. And it feels rich to have to take Laporta at 302 with those guys available later. When we look at underdogs projections, their pick'em lines where they have higher or lowers, you can see here with Sam Laporta, he's projected for 12.6 PPR points per game, right? 81.5 receptions, 875.5 receiving yards, 7.5 receiving touchdowns. And that's, a sizable advantage over McBride, Andrews, Kincaid, Pitts, Kittle, right? I included like the top 7 or so tight ends here, and you can see their consensus rank on the end. Here's the thing. When we talk about just receptions and yards, though, and we take out the touchdowns, right? Points per game with no touchdowns. Sam Laporta at 9.9, Trey McBride at 9.4, Dalton Kincaid at 9.3. So you're paying 2 rounds extra really just for touchdowns. And when we look at correlation, this is a really cool stickiness chart from Ryan Heath. Yards have a 0.71 correlation year over year, targets 0.73, whereas touchdowns are just 0.52. They're all over the place, right? We just saw that Mike Evans chart where sometimes he'll score 13, sometimes he'll score 6, sometimes he'll score 8. And you're really just paying a premium on Laporta for those 7.5 receiving touchdowns. And who's to say, even though Kincaid is a 5.5 projection, McBride is a 4.5 projection, who's to say that they can't outscore Laporta in terms of touchdowns? It wouldn't be all that crazy for that to happen, right? Especially being Kincaid in a really good offense that's going to score touchdowns. It just feels like you're paying a premium. I think, if you could get Laporta in the 4th versus McBride in the 5th and Kincaid in the 5th, then fine, 1 round difference isn't anything. But 302 is a premium pick. We're talking 24th ranked on Sleeper. I haven't drafted Laporta yet, and it's just because I see those top 5 tight ends, Kelsey, Laporta, McBride, Andrews, and Kincaid, almost all in the same tier to the point where I don't really want to pay extra for Laporta and pay that premium. And you're kind of looking at a 2v2 here of you take Laporta in the 3rd, and then you come back around later and you probably take Zay Flowers in the 5th. So you can either have Laporta and Zay Flowers, or you can take like Cooper Kupp or Nico Collins in the 3rd and then come back around in the 5th and take Trey McBride or Kincaid. I like the trade-off of the Trey McBride, Kincaid, and just get Kupp or Nico Collins. To me, it's just a bigger tier gap between the receivers there in terms of round 3 versus round 5. So again, it's not even necessarily like Sam Laporta, the player, I think is bad, but we could see some regression where last year a lot of his production came off of like 10 plus touchdowns. He didn't even hit 1,000 receiving yards, which is something that Kyle Pitts has done in the past as a rookie. We'll see. He could definitely take a step forward here. Amon-Ra St. Brown is still in this offense as well. I just don't think that he's worth taking 2 rounds ahead of the other tight ends. We have a big crop of good tight end targets this season, so I'm a little bit less likely to take Sam Laporta at the 2-3 turn. Then we have Brandon Ayuk, man. Brandon Ayuk, and I think it's because these home league sites, right, he's at the consensus 303 as the wide receiver 14. These consensus places, right, ESPN actually has him ranked just fine at 36, but Sleeper has him 26 and Yahoo has him 24th. That feels like a lot, right? That feels like a lot. We're talking about on Sleeper. I would have him, he's ranked 26th. I would have him behind Devontae Smith at this point in time. And here's why. He is somebody who is, of course, uber talented, right? We have this tweet from Jacob Gibbs. In terms of players with over 300 routes and over 3 yards per out run, he is one of the youngest players to ever do it, second youngest after Nico Collins, in a list with just Julio Jones, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill. That is rare air. That means he's a very, very talented receiver. And last year we saw as well, his efficiency numbers were crazy. Expected points per game at 10.5. He ended up being the wide receiver 41 in expected points per game. This is just based off of your targets, your red zone targets, your ADOT. And he outproduced that by 5.2. So he was the wide receiver 41 in usage, the wide receiver 15 in points per game. And I say this to say he's a very talented receiver, but you're threading such a fine needle. He hit one of the best efficiency seasons of all time, right? 3+ yards per out run, 5+ FPOE per game. And even still, he was just the wide receiver 15 in points per game. That was maxed out efficiency, wide receiver 15 in points per game. Consensus, he's wide receiver 14. And the biggest concern I have is that before the holdout stuff, I was open to making that bet and saying, you know what? He's just that good. He'll have that efficiency again. He'll be a top 15 wide receiver again. I have a hard time, again, 3+ yards per out run. Just a list of Nico Collins, Julio Jones, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill. You have to be on your game to hit a 3+ yards per out run season, and that's what he needs to hit, wide receiver 15 numbers in this offense. And if you're holding out and you're taking time away from football, I just don't expect him to just get right back on the field and carry that same efficiency. It might start slow. You have sort of established connections with Debo and Kittle. And some of you might say, well, what about the volume just going up? Well, you still have Debo there. You still have Kittle there. You still have McCaffrey there. And this is a team over the last 3 seasons that has been 32nd, 26th, and 29th in pass attempts. This is not a team that's going to pass the ball. They're a low-volume passing offense. They still have a ton of weapons. You would need an injury for his volume to go up. And then we also have these reports now. Apparently, the 49ers are still working on a deal with Ayuk. Niners Insider says that the team has had talks with the Commanders and Steelers and don't expect him in the team huddle in Week 1. So now our Week 1 status is up in the air. He's taking time off from football to the point where I don't know that he's going to be able to sustain the efficiency he had last year. And then we also have the idea that he could go to the Commanders and have a worse quarterback, or he could go to the Steelers and have a worse quarterback. So I've moved him down to the bottom of that tier where you have, Devontae Smith, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, all of those guys. I've just moved him to the back. I'm not taking him until like the very, very late 3rd or early 4th. It's just too much is up in the air, and it's too thin of again, you need 99.9 percentile efficiency from a player that could potentially start slow and hasn't been in practice or, getting game reps in. So I just think it's a tough bet to make, even though I do like the talent. And before this holdout stuff was very much fine drafting in the 3rd round. Then we have Michael Pittman. And we honestly shout out Michael Pittman in every single one of these do not draft videos, but his price is just ridiculous, man. 306 by consensus. He's going as the 20th ranked player on ESPN, as the wide receiver 10 on ESPN. Pick 40 on Sleeper, pick 35 on Yahoo. And this is how you know that his price is out of whack, is on Underdog, where it's wide receiver heavy. He's going in the 4th round on Underdog. He's going at the 306 by consensus. He's going in the 2nd round of ESPN. He's going in the 3rd round of Yahoo. Again, 4th round on Underdog, which is best ball, 3 wide receivers, 1 flex. Usually is pretty wide receiver heavy. Now, I will say, shout out to Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you check them out. Use promo code RON when you sign up, and they'll match your first deposit up to $1,000. We now have a cool, look at this thing go. We have a cool animated promo code thing here, but you can find the link in the description, the comment section down below, and you can hop into these lobbies and kind of just get a feel for what these drafts look like. And you can kind of see, even if it's a wide receiver heavy format, the players are ranked as efficiently as possible, where these rankings here are from real money. Real money is on the line. The sharpest drafters in the world are drafting here. And that's why Michael Pittman at wide receiver 25 on Underdog, but he's wide receiver 17 by consensus. That is just awful value any way you cut it. Now, when we talk about why he's ranked this way on Underdog and why people who are putting money down don't really like Michael Pittman, it's for this reason. He last year was very good, and he was actually somebody we were drafting a ton of. He was wide receiver 14 in points per game. He had 109 receptions, but just 15 of them came from Anthony Richardson. And we look here, he had 12 games without Richardson, 16.7 points per game. That's amazing. 4 without him, 4 with Anthony Richardson, but without Gardner Minshew, he had 13 points per game. Not so great. And to me, he's just a bad fit for Richardson, who is going to scramble a ton. There's not going to be a lot of pass attempts in this offense. And you also have Richardson, who likes to push the ball downfield. He had the highest ADA among the first-round quarterbacks in 2023, right? That's Bryce Young. That is C.J. Stroud. And Pittman's average depth of target over his entire career is 8.6. Jarvis Landry's career ADOT, 8.1. So we're talking about a really low ADOT player. The same reception upside of 109 still isn't there. You have A.D. Mitchell running out of the slot instead of Michael Pittman. So now you have a guy who's operating on the outside, but his ADOT super low. And then you also have the idea that Shane Steichen likes to run the ball in close. This is a good tweet from Jacob Gibbs here. The past 3 Shane Steichen seasons have all resulted in more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. Even including the Herbert rookie season, Steichen has a 41% red zone pass rate. Only 4 teams posted a lower rate than that in 2023. 41% red zone pass rate. That is going to be a lot of Anthony Richardson zone read, a lot of Jonathan Taylor up the gut. 4 touchdowns in this offense. Most of these touchdowns will be to Anthony Richardson or Jonathan Taylor, leaving Michael Pittman as the odd man out. So now we have lower PPR upside in terms of receptions just based on Richardson scrambling instead of checking it down or looking to throw the ball deep. And then less touchdowns because it'll just be Richardson and it'll be Jonathan Taylor pounding it into the end zone. So I have a very tough time taking Pittman anywhere near where he goes in these home league drafts. I personally have him right now as a 5th rounder in my rankings. Now, our 6th player is going to be Alvin Kamara. He's going at the 410 by consensus, pick 33 on ESPN. When we talk about dead zone running backs, of guys that are just simply projections for workloads and nothing else, Kamara fits the bill. I just simply can't take him. When we look at it year over year from Jacob Gibbs here, his avoided tackle rate by season has just gone down every single year since 2019. Last year, he was 6th worst in tackle avoidance rate. And when we see that, this is where we can kind of see running backs start to decline. And yes, I understand, okay, well, he just has Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams behind him, but that's the trap. He's on the 25th projected scoring offense. It's going to just be a PPR scam, but not as good as it was last year. And in the 4th round, you're passing on Malik Neighbors. You're passing on DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith here in these consensus rankings in terms of home leagues. I just can't get there. I'd rather take Kenneth Walker, who goes in this range. I'd rather take James Cook, who goes in this range if you really want a running back here. This is where I'm also taking like tight ends and elite quarterbacks. To me, Alvin Kamara is just a pretty brutal bet. You can also get, right at this 4-5 turn as well, Tank Dell, Rashee Rice, T. Higgins. So to me, Kamara in the 4th round, just very clear dead zone running back that I want nothing to do with. And our last player, our 7th player that I am not drafting inside of the top 6 rounds of fantasy drafts is Keenan Allen. He's going at the 607 as the wide receiver 31, as high as pick 64 over on Sleeper. And people don't understand, yes, he had the best year of his career last year, but it wasn't because he played his best football, if that makes sense. He was a big beneficiary from Kellen Moore. Here you can see when Allen was used in pre-snap motion, Kellen Moore usually uses this guy out of the slot with pre-snap motion. It's why people are very high on either A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith based on who they think is going to have this role in Kellen Moore's offense in Philly. He had a 35% target per route run as a pre-snap motion guy, 13.2% first downs per route run. Without motion, 26% targets per route run, 9.9% first downs per route run, which is just fine, but it's not like Keenan Allen was a monster and had his best career ever. This is like a pretty standard Keenan Allen year, and I think that we're going to have a bit of a come down here. He's changing teams, new quarterback, new system, and he has looked pretty brutal in the preseason so far. Now, I will say it is just preseason, but so far he is ranked 250th of 285 qualifying receivers. You have guys like Hayden Wings looking at his film and saying he doesn't move the same way that he's moved in the past. And then you also have the downside that Shane Waldron puts him in the JSN role that we all hated from last year. People keep saying, oh, it's going to be Rome Odunze. I don't think so. Rome Odunze's final year in college, he had a 15.5-yard ADOT downfield, only played 17.4% of his snaps from the slot. On the other side, Keenan Allen has much similar numbers to JSN, where he's at 9.9-yard ADOT, 59% slot rate, to JSN 6.4-yard ADOT and 69% slot rate. Now, you might say, well, 9.9-yard ADOT is much further downfield than JSN 6.4. Well, JSN's ADOT in college was 9 yards plus, and Shane Waldron then took that down and forced him to pee in this role. We could 100% see this happen to Keenan Allen. So the downside of age, falling off due to, age and injury. He's missed a ton of games over the last 2 years. We've seen these wide receivers change teams and then completely fall off, right, in the past, where we've seen Julio Jones go to Tennessee. You've, of course, seen a lot of other ones that I don't want to mention it in a bad way, but of course you've seen like Andre Johnson go to the Colts. You've seen a lot of things not work out. Brandon Marshall to the Giants. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of these guys that late in their careers, they change teams, and it just doesn't work out as planned here. So I just can't do it. There's almost never a time where I'm on the clock and Keenan Allen is available, but Rome Odunze isn't either. I just prefer Rome Odunze straight up. I know that that's a hot take, but if I'm on the clock and they're both there, I'm taking Rome. It would have to be a scenario for me where Rome Odunze is not on the clock, but Keenan Allen is, for me to ever end up with him on my roster, and that just hasn't happened. And we do structure our teams for the back half of the season, and usually these veterans sort of tail off as the season goes on, whereas the rookies end up being the league winners down the stretch, like Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed, Zay Flowers, and Puka Nacua all were last year, and I think Rome Odunze has a much better chance of being that than, of course, a guy like Keenan Allen. Now, that is going to do it for us today. If you want to make sure you're avoiding sinking your team with busts in these early rounds. Make sure you check out the rankings over on patreon.com/Ron Stewart. You can find them in the description and the comment section down below. I have my top 200 cheat sheet with tiers and my target rounds for each player, and they are based completely off of all the research we do from all these videos where I have all of these guys pushed down so you won't be drafting them. You'll be drafting the guys with RB1 upside early and filtering your teams down the strategies that we outline on this channel. But if you can't support there, just leave a like. Again, almost at 50,000 subscribers, so make sure if you're not already, subscribe if you're new, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm